Hey, what's going on everybody? My name is Seth and I am with Elite Turf Supply. And today we're going to show you an 8-step process for an entire turf install. So from A to Z, we're going to cover dig out, base prep, laying the grass, putting infill in. So if you're in Utah, Idaho, we can supply straight to your door. So if you're looking for supplies or you're looking for installers, check the link in the description. You can find us online or on Instagram. We can help you from start to finish with your install and give you materials that best fit your needs. So the first step is determining what materials you're going to need to complete the job. So for finishing the job, you'll need turf, infill, seam tape, nails, and glue. The tools, if you don't already own them, it's going to be pickaxes, shovels, wheelbarrows. A plate compactor is very important. To finish the grass, all we're going to need is hammers, carpet kickers, razor blades. That'll pretty much be able to get the job done from start to finish. So the 3 most common types of grass that we install for residential yards are going to be our Elite 82, our Elite 108, and our Elite 94. The most popular turf that we see the most people pick is the Elite 82. It has a really bright, vibrant look to it, kind of has that fresh spring look. You know, it makes your house pop. It also is very soft to the touch, and that's attractive to a lot of people. Alrighty, so an important step to consider when you're thinking about installing turf is seeing if you're doing a backyard or a front yard, if your windows are casting any harsh reflections to where the grass might be laid. Because if the windows are reflecting, they get pretty hot. So when it reflects onto the grass, it'll actually melt the turf. We call it turf burn. So what I do when I do my installs is if I have a job, I will come to the house, usually in the morning, midday, and at the end of the day, depending on if it's facing west or east, and I will determine if there is any reflections that are gonna potentially harm the grass. Alrighty, so we are cutting ahead a little bit further into our day in the install. We have our window tint guys throwing up ContraVision window film up on this window right here. Now, not every job is exactly the same. So before you start to install your turf, get outside, make sure to check that the windows aren't reflecting onto the grass or where it's gonna be. If you can prevent turf burn later on down the road, that's what you're looking for. So just take that into precaution when you are installing turf, and then from there, get windows tinted if needed. So once you have your turf materials, and once you have tinted your windows if needed, the next step is going to be the dig out process. So from here, we're gonna dig out 4 inches of existing sod. Most of the time, we're digging out grass because we're replacing and saving water for homeowners. So what we use to dig out, if it's a smaller yard, if we don't have the best access, we will just do pickaxes and shovels. If the yard has access for a dingo or a skid steer or possibly an excavator, that will speed up the dig out process. In this yard, we're just doing it by hand. So we're gonna start by digging out 4 inches, getting all this sod out, and then we're gonna bring in our base material. So when we're digging out, if we have cement along our border, which is ideal, as soon as you see this slag is just the bottom part of the cement that's unfinished, this stuff right here. As soon as I see that, that's how I know I'm at the correct depth for putting my base in. Most people will say, hey, what about my gas lines? Gas lines usually don't come into effect when we're installing turf because we're only digging out 4 inches. Gas lines are usually buried in between 18 and 24 inches below the ground. So if you are concerned about it, call Blue Stakes, have them come out here, stake out where the gas lines are. But because we don't dig that deep, 4 inches is usually perfect for our dig out. And then once you've dug out your sod, the best way to dispose of it is to just take it to a green waste dump. Normally you'll have to pay a few bucks to get it dumped, but that's what we use as a common practice to get rid of our existing sod. When we find a sprinkler like this, you can cap these sprinklers. I myself like to remove all the PVC because in the event that the valve isn't shut off or whatever, just preparing for the worst. If they do a blowout and there's a broken pipe or something and it bursts underneath the turf, there's potential to where all that water, wherever it's leaking, is gonna sink your base material over time. So what we'll do is we'll dig a little trench here and see if we can find our PVC depending on how deep it is. And when you dig a trench and you rebury it, recompacting that trench is very important. If you don't recompact that trench, stuff will settle over time, turf might sink, the base might sink. So it's just all about taking precautions to make sure that you're not called back, within a few weeks. So you're gonna dig a little trench here, find the PVC, see if we can remove it all or just need to cap it. When installing artificial grass, it's very crucial to have a hard edge to secure your turf to. So in this yard, we have a decent amount of cement. We have a mowing curb, we have a little patio here, And then along the fence line, we obviously have our white vinyl fence. So with this curbing right here, this is ideal for installing turf against, in my own opinion. It's a solid edge to where the base isn't gonna, bow it out or anything like that. It's really solid, so it's gonna hold up for a long time. If you don't have cement poured and you're looking to find an edging as a replacement, I would recommend using bender board or like black metal edging or some sort of composite lumber. Trex decking can be a really solid edging for the perimeter of a yard. So you just dig it down, create a little trench, stake it in, create your hard edge, and then build your base up to it from there. Where'd that pipe go? So after you have everything dug out, your next step is to prep the ground with your base material. Base is easily the most important part of any install, because however your base looks is exactly how your turf is gonna look. So if you have weird low spots or high spots somewhere in your yard, those are gonna stick out kind of like a sore thumb. The material that we're using for our base today is called blended borrow. For base material, a lot of people are familiar with road base. Road base is commonly used in landscaping and construction. The reason that we don't usually use road base for turf install is because it doesn't drain as well. When you're prepping for a turf install, your base needs to be permeable. So blended borrow has squeegee mixed into the aggregate, which makes it permeable when it's compacted at 96%. If you can't get blended borrow, what I like to use is a combination of 3/4 inch gravel and crusher fines. So I'll do 2.5 inches of 3/4 inch gravel and then 1.5 inches of crusher fines. The gravel is gonna be used as a drain basin, and then the crusher fines is for my top layer, because I want the top layer to be very smooth. A smooth top layer will ensure that you have a sharp looking install at the end. So we got our blended borrow delivered today. So you're gonna see us filling it up with wheelbarrows, wheeling it out, dump it in piles, and then spreading it out evenly. I don't want the runoff to go towards your house and potentially flood your basement. So what I want to do is I want the yard to slope away from the house so we don't have any further problems down the road. What we're gonna do here in between us prepping our base is we're gonna roll out our grass to sit in the sun for a little bit. Most turf products are gonna be polyurethane, which basically means that once it sits in the sun, it's gonna expand a little bit, and then when it's cold, it's gonna contract. So when you're installing turf, you wanna expand it as much as possible so you don't get waves or wrinkles in your yard later on down the road. Should be pretty relaxed by the time we're ready to install. Our next step after we have all of our base in, our base is leveled out pretty good here. We're gonna get ready for compaction. The most important part, watering your base. So water is gonna be really helpful for the compaction rate of your base material. Once I have my base to where I want it to be, I'll give it a really good soak. I'll soak it down and then I let it sit for like 10 minutes. And then I'll run the compactor over it one time, get nice and flat, and then I'll check to see if I have any low spots or high spots that I need to kind of go over and fix. Look at the bottom right now. So this is what happens, it creates ridges that it's not gonna give you a smooth compaction. So it was a little too wet when we started, and this is what we don't want. Well, a handy margin trowel usually does the trick. The hand tampers that we use that are over there, the hand tampers are really helpful for around the perimeter, and the compactor will naturally create like little ridges from each pass that you make. And once we're done fully compacting, we'll go around with the hand tampers and just take those ridges out. But the plate compactor is super important to make sure that your base is compacted at, we're shooting for like a 96% compaction rate. Trying to hand tamp 4 inches of base is really hard to get it perfectly compacted. So I would recommend 100% of the time, unless you have a patch that's like a 5x5, sure. But anything above that, Home Depot, Diamond Rental, there's a bunch of power equipment rentals. Expect to rent it out for at least a half day, take it back. But if you want your job to go smoothly and quickly and efficiently, plate compactor is the way to go. So it's kind of hard to tell from this angle if we're high or low. Some people use a laser level. I got a laser level built in right here. So I just get down on my belly, take a gander at where my base is sitting. Where's the low spot? Right there. So for this low spot right here, we'll just throw some shovels and just kind of rake it out, make it look a little better. That crest right there, that might look nice. However, low spot crests look okay, low spots don't look good. And this is also why you order a little bit more base than what you think you need. So if you need to determine how much base you need, just type in like aggregate or rock calculator, type in your square footage, what size aggregate you're using, and it'll tell you exactly how many tons you're gonna need for 4 inches of depth. Better. So this high spot, like I said, I'm not mad at having a little crest, but if I were gonna have a crest, I would put it all the way through the yard and have the whole thing go like this. But if it's just in one section, I'm not usually too happy with that. I want it to be pretty even all the way around. So on the high spot, I'm just gonna bust up the area that's obviously a little too high. Anybody can install turf. The process is super simple. If you watch these videos or you call us and talk to us at Elite, we can walk you through pretty much the whole process. We'll give you all the tools you need for how to get it done. We'll help you pick out your turf, make sure you got the right base material. We'll help you measure your yard. It's very, very attainable. We've had plenty of people who have done huge yards DIY and they've turned out great. So chalk line me, daddy. Tuck it in, pull it tight on both ends. All right, so when we were laying out artificial turf, similar to real grass in some instances, is there's a grain, there's a direction of the grain. So there's an up grain view and there's a down grain view. So when you're thinking about how to lay your turf out, it's wherever you're gonna look at it the most. So in this scenario, they're gonna come out from their back door this way, and they're gonna be looking up the turf right here. So we wanna face the grain towards the house. Because if you had it flipped the other way, it's gonna look really shiny and kind of plasticky, if you will. When you lay the grain this way, you see into the thatch layer and it gives it a much darker color, as well as being able to see the thatch layer, which is all the dead blades that make it look a little bit more realistic. When it comes to cutting turf and maybe leaving some overhanging, always order like an extra foot, because things happen, you don't quite know what's gonna pop up when you're doing your install, and you never wanna short yourself. As far as measuring your yard, when you have your area laid out and you kinda know where you're gonna lay the grass, each of these rolls comes in a 15-foot width. So if you're gonna do an S seam or an invisible seam, I always start from the furthest point in my yard, whether I'm starting on the right or on the left. I'll go over 14 feet 6 inches, and then find my longest length within that 14 feet 6 inches, and then I'll keep going down until I'm done. The reason that I do 14.6 is to leave a 6-inch overlap to create a seam that's invisible. All right, so we are going to start cutting our S seam, our invisible seam. First, I'm gonna go over the blades that I like to use, or normally, if you just get a utility blade like this, this does a great job. The thing about these blades is you wanna change out this blade, or at least switch it every 10 feet. When you're cutting turf, it starts to fray out and doesn't give you a clean edge if you have a dull blade. So rotating your blades and switching them out is very important. After we cut our seam, we're gonna glue it down for extra security. It's really important to pick a really solid, strong glue. As far as the seaming process goes, shout out to Joe Watkins for hooking us up with these seam tools. Just a quick little tidbit, general rule of thumb. The curves, the top of the curve needs to be pointing at where you cut this turf from. So don't have it faced inside towards your seam. You wanna have it face to the outside right here, because this is what we're gonna be cutting off. So the first step is to measure down 9 inches. I'm gonna take my tape there. I'm just gonna make a little mark right where I know it is. And then I'm gonna make a relief cut right here. I'm gonna do the same thing on the other end. So I have a 9-inch mark on each side. And then what I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna take this chalk line as a reference point. Then take it over there to where we have that slit. I'm gonna take this. And this is gonna act as our guide for the bottom of our seam tool, so we don't jump around and potentially, cut too much or not enough. Something that I like to live by when it comes to turf is it's always better to leave it a little long than it is to be a little short. Because if you leave it short and you have a gap that you're gonna be able to see, you're gonna have to go back and patch that. Once I have my 9-inch mark down and I snapped a chalk line on the bottom, I'm gonna take this, and on the first side, I'm gonna line the edge of the turf up with the flat part of this seam tool right here. What I'm gonna do here is make sure that I'm on the line. You can use a marker and trace this seam tool. I prefer to hold it down, and really the technique is to just make sure that you're keeping the pressure of your blade down and then up against the seam tool, and that'll allow for a pretty accurate cut here. Shift down a little bit. Hopefully that makes it. All right, so that's one side. Flip this piece over. These right here are carpet kickers that I like to use to shift the grass around, you know, obviously stretch it out, get all the wrinkles that you can. A lot of them come with these fine tooth blades on them like this. If it just has these, it's not the one you want. What you want is you want carpet kickers that have these extendable teeth on it, because when you go into the turf, it's gonna grip it a lot easier than if it didn't have any extendable teeth. And if I try to kick it, like it doesn't grip, and it just kind of like skips over the turf. So getting a carpet kicker with extendable teeth is gonna be the way to go when you're stretching this grass. So right here, we kind of cut our seam, and now I'm just getting it into place. The gap that I'm looking for in between each piece of turf is about 1/8 of an inch. The same rule applies to the perimeter as well. So when you're trimming the edges, you want to stay about 1/8, anywhere between 1/8 and 1/4. If you can stay within that, that's a perfect gap. Any bigger than that, you're gonna see your edges, you're gonna see the seam. You want it to be pretty tight, but you don't want it to be touching, because right now I have a little bit of overlap right here between each piece, and you can see that this piece is sitting up higher than the other one. So if we didn't go back and trim this, you're gonna have a mohawk all the way down your seam, and that's where you're gonna see it. So the point of this invisible seam is to make it, you know, so people don't catch it with their eye. You know, a straight seam, most of the time you'll be able to see it, but the S seam is just that extra step that you can take to ensure that, you know, it looks pristine and perfect. These right here are a 10-inch galvanized gutter spike, or a timber tie. They have a spiral shape to them. There's 10 different ways that you can install turf. What I'm showing you today is kind of my method. When it comes to stretching, there's a few different ways you can do it. So once you have your grass laid out, a very common practice in the turf industry is to start from an edge, get it all trimmed up, throw some nails in, and then just kick wrinkles out as you go. And once you push a wrinkle out, you can actually throw a nail into the grass just to hold it there. For stretching the grass, you know, you can let it sit out in the sun for a long time. The sun's your best friend when you're installing this. It'll do a pretty good job of expanding it already. So if you throw some nails in the middle, just make sure that you're using a carpet kicker as you go to work those bubbles out, to make sure that we're not, you know, creating wrinkles for further on down the road. Now the method that I'm gonna use today is one that is pretty specific to myself. And all I'm doing is these big nails, they're not going to be sunk into the turf. They're just gonna hold it and anchor it while I'm stretching it. In my mind, the further you stretch the grass and as tight as you can get it, once you pin down the edges, it's there, it's not gonna move. And then at the end, once our seams are glued and our edges are nailed, we will go through and pull all these out at the end. When you're driving any nail into the turf, whether you're leaving them in there to secure it down or you're using this method to just anchor it while you're stretching, there's stitch rows in this grass. So when they manufacture it, they stitch it into rows all up and down. You never want to take your nail in the middle of the grass, drive it down, and then just hammer it in, because what that does is you're catching these blades up here and you're taking them down into a hole. And what that looks like over the yard is just a bunch of dimples all up and down the grass. So you wanna make sure that you're putting the nails in correctly to avoid that. So the way that I do that, the reason I mentioned the stitch rows go vertically like this. So what I do is I take the nail, which is your best friend here. I wanna go in between the stitch rows, and I'm gonna peel the grass back to where I just see the backing of the turf. So there's these little rows right here, and that's where I wanna put my nail. So I'm not taking any of the blades down with it. and I'm gonna leave it sticking out about like that. Now from here, I'm gonna kind of stretch in a star pattern. And since it's so hot today, I'm not gonna be kicking very hard. I'm just simply shifting the bubble out as I go. So from the first one, just gonna kick a little bit, push that ripple out, kick a little bit until I get to where I wanna put my next nail. And what's important is you can see there's a little bubble that I brought out from that last nail. So once the pressure's on my knee and I'm where I wanna be, I'm gonna do the same thing that I just showed you. I'm gonna put my nail in there, spread the blades so I just find the backing. I'm not taking any blades down with it. And now I'm gonna go and create a little diamond shape. So I'm gonna go forwards, backwards, and then side to side to begin. Spread the blades. Now I'm gonna go to the side. I'm gonna kick, push the ripple out. So now I have a little diamond shape right here. I have one in the middle, and I have 4 on the perimeter. So from this point, I'm gonna stretch diagonally, just at kind of like a 45-degree angle. When we're trimming edges, you want it to be fairly snug. So I am going to peel this back and have a rough guide of where I need to be. And these are relief cuts, so I can move the grass a little bit easier. Basically what we're looking for when we're trimming an edge, we don't want it touching and we don't want it too far away. So when you're trimming, you want to be about 1/8 of an inch from the backing of your turf to the cement. You can stay within 1/8 of an inch or 1/4, but as soon as you go too big, you're gonna see that. And then if you're touching the cement, once you drive a nail in, you're gonna create a bunch of bubbles behind there. So 1/8 to 1/4 is kind of the general rule of thumb when we're cutting turf. So right here, I'm just gonna let my blade do the work and just trace this cement. And part of the reason I like these Milwaukee fastbacks a lot is I use this, what holds my blade, as like my guide for my gap. So if I peel this back, if that can fit and touches both the backing and the cement, that's what I'm looking for. You don't want it touching, not too far away. You just want to be able to see just a little bit of the base. And this is why we leave a little bit overhanging, because on the edge, if you trim off that last little bit and you get to the blades that are sticking straight up, looks like someone came here with a weed whip and just edged your lawn. So it'll look like that 100% of the time, which is pretty cool. So there's a couple different ways that we can trim turf when we're up against a wall or a fence, something like this. You could peel it back and find which stitch row you're on and just cut that stitch row all the way down, and hopefully it'll match up. The reason that I don't do that is because most fences or walls, they're not perfectly plumbed off. So if you followed a stitch row all the way down and then put it down, you might be like 1 inch off up here, but then be tight up here. So that's where these come into play. I use these on every install. So this makes it really easy for me to get a really precise cut against a wall. Because on the cement, I can come like this and I can trim it nice and easily without running into this wall. But with the scissors, I can actually just kind of follow the wall perfectly without messing up or taking too much or not enough. And when I use these scissors, I'm only cutting the backing of the turf. I'm really trying to not take any of the blades with me, because I don't want to take huge chunks out and then have it look funny. So when I was cutting around this window well right here where our seam was, I just made my relief cut like 1.5 inches too long. I have a pretty sizable gap right here. Now I will never leave that looking like that. That's lazy. It's lucky that I have a seam right here, because what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut like a half moon shape, like right out of the turf like this, and connect it into my seam. And then I'm just gonna glue all this down. This is a low foot traffic area, so I'm not worried about it. And the reason that I'm cutting a half moon shape is the same reason why I cut the S seam. Because if I were to just take a box out like this, just a rectangle, you're gonna see that any day of the week. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut a little curve to it. This is what we call seam tape. So seam tape is what we join the two pieces of turf together with. There are some people that'll say, why don't you just use a two-sided, sticky adhesive? The reason I don't is that sticky stuff, it'll rupture over time and then that seam's gonna split. So using this seam tape and using it in between the seam and while also adhering glue to this seam tape is gonna be the best option for longevity of the seam, holding up to foot traffic, obviously. So this is where practice comes in handy. So I'm gonna take a marker and I'm just going to lightly trace the outside where I need to put it. So if you remember the grain part of our video, we want it to be going the same way. So obviously I want to pick a piece big enough that's going to, allow me to have a little bit of overlap to where I can trim this to size while also, fitting exactly in this. So I'll go find a piece real quick. All right. And if I was gonna have a patch anywhere, here's the ideal spot because I have a seam here. So I'm already gonna be gluing all this. So when I'm glue this, I'll just peel this back a little bit, throw some glue under, rock and roll. So I'll peel this side back, peel this side back a little bit until what I'm aiming for is I want the top of the S seam to be right in the middle of the tape. So I'm gonna lay the seam tape down and then I'm just gonna throw a couple of nails in it just to hold it in place. And these are gonna be permanent. Make sure your seam tape is clean. These automatic caulking guns are the best.
Whoa! Cool gun.
What the Attempt number 2. So usually I'll come and kind of thicken up the outside. The biggest thing that you want to focus on when you're putting this down, we don't want the blades to get into the glue. If the blades get into the glue, it's a little bit messy to get out. Now, if you do get glue in your blades, it's as easy as getting some paper towel and then some WD-40 and then cleaning it off that way. So we're gonna lay this side down. All I'm looking for is for it to not fall or the blades not to get in, that's all. All right, so now after we have our seam laid down with the glue, we are going to throw some bags of infill on top of the seam to help the glue set up. So after you've glued your seam, as I had mentioned, we don't want the blades to get into the glue because it makes a mess. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put the bags of infill on the seam to help the glue set up, weigh it down, spread the glue out. It'll help a little bit. So James, I'll have you come over and bring me a bag. And then as you lay the bag down, we wanna find where our seam is and we wanna pull the blades so they're standing up like this. So put the bag on its butt right there. And then I'm gonna pull these blades up as you lay it down. Go ahead. Because if we were to just throw the bag on like this, those blades are gonna get sat down into where that glue is. Then we're gonna have to clean it. And lay it down for me.
Ready?
Yep. And that's the seam for you. If it's warm out, it'll probably set up within 30 minutes. That's usually what I normally see. If it's a little bit colder, it's gonna take more like an hour. We have our seams glued, so now we're gonna move on to nailing the perimeter. So when you're choosing nails for securing the turf, you can go common nail, galvanized nail, both will work great. I usually recommend doing a 6-inch nail. That usually gets the job done pretty good, but what I wanna focus on is the profile of the head. I don't want it too big. I want it small enough to where it fits right in between the stitch rows, so we're not seeing every nail head all along the perimeter. Around places where people are gonna be crossing over the turf, I'll do every like 3 to 4 inches, because what I don't want is I don't want people to be able to kick the turf up and peel it back. I want it to stay there and be really tight. And then on the perimeter, where not a lot of people are walking, we do every 4 to 6 normally. So the technique is you split the blades of grass with your nail, come back a stitch row or 2. Remember, we don't want to take any blades with us. Now I'm gonna start at an angle, and I'm just using the head of my hammer, and then as soon as I feel the tip of my nail hit the hard edge that I'm going up against, I'm gonna stand it up. And as I stand it up, as soon as I get to about there, I'm gonna flip it and use the claw. And the reason is I don't wanna smash the blades down with the nail. And I can be more precise that way. If you do it right, you can't even see the nail without infill on it. So that's a technique that I like to use when nailing down perimeters. So now that we have all of our edges nailed down, all of our seams are cut and glued, so we're ready to move on to the infill. So the infill that I recommend to use on pretty much any install is gonna be EnviroFill. First off, it's got this nice green color to it, so it blends in really well. Secondly, it has antimicrobial, antibacterial properties to the infill, so it helps filter all the bacteria through the grass. So anything that gets into it, you're not gonna have to worry about that. The kicker is it has an odor eliminator to it. So if you have pets or you have kids, you know, stuff's gonna get into the turf just like your regular yard would. So with this EnviroFill, it's gonna help kill any odor that gets into the grass, as well as it's gonna weigh it down and stand the blades up. This is a very crucial part to finishing an install. A lot of people use regular silica sand. The reason that I don't recommend regular sand is because regular sand collects a lot of mold and mildew, and it's also very coarse, so it rubs the backing raw. You're not gonna get a full 20-year lifespan out of it. So we really recommend to go with the EnviroFill. This is gonna help with the longevity of your install, as well as, you know, keep smells out, help stand the blades up, help it, you know, look good for a very long time. And the installation process of this is, this drop spreader is the easiest to use. We're looking to shoot for about 2 pounds a square foot on this grass that we have in front of us. We wanna cover about 40% of the blade. So the idea with the drop spreader is you're gonna do it just how you mow a lawn. So you're gonna start on one edge, you're gonna go horizontally, back and forth, until you're done, and then you're gonna go vertically. And then once you've done that, if you have some more bags, just keep running it over until you're all done. So on the edges, I always fill them by hand, because that's where all the nails are, and that's where, you know, we have a little bitty gap in between our hard edge and our turf. So I really want to fill this up, and the reason I do it is because it kind of helps with that crisp, clean end product. This is more of like an OCD thing that I do, because at the end what we'll do is we'll take a hose and we'll push this all into the edge here. Obviously you can see it's building up here in the grass. At first thought, you might think, oh, that's enough. I'll just start power brewing my infill in. But the truth of the matter is all this stuff is just getting stuck on top of the blades. So the power broom is what's gonna drive that down into the backing, help it stand it up. So if we give you 20 bags, let's say, for your install, use all 20 bags. Now replacing this later on, it's gonna rarely happen. Most of the time we see that you might have to add a couple of pounds in one spot if it got moved around a little bit every 2 or so years. So maintenance on infill is not a requirement. It may happen down the road, but as you can see, this piling up, it may look like enough, but once we power broom it, it'll all get sunk down into the turf. So we're gonna use all the bags that we have here. Right here, this is our trusty power broom. Now you can use a push broom to do this, but one of these makes the job a lot easier. Just a bristle broom attachment on a weed whip, and this really helps stand the blades up and drive the, don't do this to me right now. So if your power broom doesn't work, like it just happened to us, a stiff bristle broom will do the job. For DIYers, most of the time, you know, people just don't own the power broom. Most people have one of these in their house. This will do the exact same thing, just takes a little bit longer. So we're pushing against the grain. If you remember earlier, we talked about laying the grain to where the customer or yourself, if you're doing DIY, has the best view of the turf. You don't want to broom it this way, down grain, because it doesn't stand the blades up, it just lays them down. So you want to push against the blades, like this, to help stand them up along your way. Another pro tip that we like to use is, that I think will work, is a blower. Just cleaning up these little scraps that sit on top. Usually a power broom will do a good job at this, but today our power broom is out of commission, so doing it by hand. Normally these will stick around for about 6 months to a year, these little scraps, and they'll usually kind of blow away over time. So just expect that if you're doing a project. They will be around for a little bit. Watering down after the infill because it'll help compress the infill to the thatch layer or the backing of the grass. So it'll sit a little lower. We just don't want everything sitting on top. Okay, so there we have it. There is your 8-step tutorial for a DIY turf install. Something quickly I want to go over with you guys is maintenance and what you can expect. Obviously, one of the huge pros to turf is number 1, saving water, number 2, low maintenance. The most maintenance that you're gonna have to do on a yard like this is simply maybe add a couple of pounds of infill where it may have gotten shifted around from foot traffic every couple of years. That's really what we see. Other than that, it's gonna stay good and look good for a very long time. If you guys are looking for a supplier, looking for materials, looking for help on your job, look us up on eliteturfsupply.com online, Elite Turf Supply on Instagram. You can call our office line, which is 385-248-0577. We can help you from start to finish, get you what grass you need, help you through all these steps, and hopefully transform your backyard into something beautiful.